Welcome to Mr. Clarke's recorded lesson for 10.1, the Italian Renaissance. Just give you some general information in terms of what you should be doing in regard to the lesson activities. So for each recorded lesson, we'll be having a series of lesson objectives, kind of the main ideas that we'll be looking at in the lesson. And your requirement as we go through each lesson is to answer each of the questions. I'll take you through the responses. But before I take you through the responses, one of the things you want to do is kind of think about how you might respond yourself. Kind of come up with your own ideas and see how they might match up with what I share out with you. The idea is for you to get a good understanding of all of the main ideas that we'll be studying throughout the school year. And we'll be doing this through the recorded lesson format. What I've done is kind of looked at each of the main topics in the chapters, each section, and kind of break it down for you to make sure you have a good understanding of everything we study throughout the school year. And if you mindlessly go through it without really thinking about the questions and the responses, then obviously you're not going to get as much out of it as if you really put a lot of effort into, thinking through each question and response. Hopefully that helps you a little bit. So when we think about the Italian Renaissance, some of the key characteristics of the Renaissance that we'll be looking at are some of the reasons why it began in Italy. We'll look at some of the characteristics of artists and explain how their ideas impacted this period of time. We'll be looking at some of the great writers of the Renaissance. We'll explain the impact of the Renaissance on society and why it's still relevant today. Throughout the school year, we'll be looking at a wide variety of different topics. And one of the things we'd like to do is kind of find out how it kind of still impacts us today. So if we're looking at something 600-700 years ago, why in the world are we still studying it today? So hopefully we get a lot of that as we move forward. So the first question, one, list the characteristics that signified a transition between medieval times and early modern times. So when you think about those periods of time, hopefully something kind of pops into your head when you think about medieval times versus modern times. So some of the characteristics that signaled kind of a transition would be kind of the growth and expansion of cities, people kind of coming together. Even in the imagery that we saw up the top there, which is Florence, you can see some of the broad ideas and some of the different architecture and how things are being built together, kind of looking at some of the first modern cities. Expansion of trade, embracing culture. So those would be some of the things we'll be seeing as we move forward as we look at the Renaissance. When we think about the expansion of trade, that means that different areas are trading and starting commerce with each other instead of operating in isolation. And culture means kind of like shared ideas amongst people. Number two, how did the Renaissance influence the view about humankind? Now, keep in mind, too, that the word Renaissance that you should be familiar with literally means rebirth. So you should understand that it's kind of a rebirth of culture. Because when you look at the different periods of time in history, and we looked at this a little bit in our introductory activity, during ancient times, there was more culture and more writing and more creativity. Then we had kind of the Dark Ages or medieval times where everything kind of contracted. And now we're seeing a rebirth here during the Italian Renaissance. So we're looking at number two and how the Renaissance impacted the view of humankind. Less emphasis on religion, more focused on your daily lives, appreciating your life. Individual achievement became something of merit during this period of time instead of just focusing in on preparation for the afterlife and kind of being loyal to the church. Citizens are starting to focus a little bit more on individual creativity. And there's more emphasis too as you move forward on education and the sciences, all of which helps to contribute to the growth and expansion within society. Okay, number three, and I kind of gave you a heads up to the literal meaning of Renaissance. And why might this be then an appropriate meaning for this period? As I alluded to before, and sometimes I'll do that, I kind of get a little excited to give and share out information as we move forward to make sure everything is clear. So when we look at Renaissance, that means rebirth and kind of a rebirth of culture, a reemphasis on ancient Greek and Roman culture. So those are the two great societies that is going to really see the rebirth aspect of the Renaissance: ancient Greek and ancient Roman writings, architecture, paintings, things like that. Okay, question number 4. What subjects are part of the humanities? Well, if you look at the root of the word there, human. So when you think about the study of people and all aspects of humankind, you might think about what subjects might relate to humanity, some of which you have either completely have today or you have something that is directly related to. So religion, obviously, that has a lot to do with humans and people that they emphasize, and even like within religion too, and you'll think about like the Bible and other religious works, the Quran. There's a lot of individuals who are contained within the religious studies. Rhetoric, that's just a fancy word for like writings and thoughts. A lot of your great humanists, people writing during this period of time, wrote a lot and put forth their philosophies. Philosophy would be part of the humanities as well. I'm not listing everything out there. Languages, history, literature. You can see within the humanities there, that little info bubble there. You can see a lot of different things we mentioned: philosophy, religion, literature, culture, languages, and history. So you can see all those words kind of emphasized in that infograph there. 5, explain the work of Francesco Petrarch and how he had an impact on many, many generations of Europeans after the Renaissance. So we'll be looking at some of the individuals who impact the Renaissance as we move forward. So Petrarch was a great writer. He was a poet, one of the first humanists to embrace some of the ancient culture. Most importantly, he wrote in the vernacular, everyday language, so that everyday citizens could read and understand. And then because he was such a great writer and basically wrote his entire life, according to popular myth, when he finally died, he was found dead at his desk with a pen in hand, kind of slumped over, writing until his very last breath. And then a quote from Petrarch: "Life hurries on, a frantic refugee, and death with great force marches, follows fast. And all the present leagues with all the past and all the future to make war on me." Question number 6. What did Renaissance humanists have in common with ancient Greek and Roman thinkers? Instead of simply relying on the Catholic Church and emphasizing religion, they wrote about other issues of importance. This, of course, is going to help spark creativity and expand knowledge during this period of time. Okay, give you a moment there. And of course, if at any point in time I go too quickly through any of these lessons, you obviously have the ability to pause and write down what you need to. Hopefully, I go at a pace where you're able to get all the information down within the amount of time allotted. And of course, I usually leave the previous responses up there for a moment or two as we go through the next question, so you always have that opportunity to kind of catch up. Okay, 7, think about the characteristics of the Italian Renaissance that are present in modern-day American society and culture. And again, here's an opportunity for you to make some connections from hundreds of years ago to today. Okay, citizens today tend to embrace life and the humanities, and you obviously have a lot of good, several aspects of the humanities within the required curriculum that you study at the high school. Arts and culture are very important within society today. Many of the different major works that were written during this period of time, either during the Renaissance or even during ancient times, are available in multiple languages. Okay, next, we're going to look at why the Renaissance began in Italy. So we look here even at the map. What do you notice about Italy? When you think about Italy and you think about especially during the 1400s and why the location of Italy and even the geographic makeup of Italy would make it kind of the center point during this period of time. Well, when you think about Italy, first of all, it's in the very southern tip of Europe. So it's really the connection to Africa and even a little bit lesser extent to Asia. It's surrounded by water on three sides, which allows for it to have great port cities, which is really, really important during this period of time. And so based on its geographic location and as well as its physical makeup, being basically a peninsula with water on three sides, it makes it a very easy spot for trade. So a lot of the trade from Africa and Asia into Europe would go through Italy and then move northward by land. I'm just going to shrink the size of the map for a second here. Okay, when you look at number 8, why did the Renaissance begin in Italy, as we mentioned? In addition to its geographic makeup, when you think about emphasizing a lot of the culture, the arts, and things like that, that takes money. So a lot of the money through the trade is generated within Italy. Okay, Italy was once the center of the Roman Empire, so just naturally, if we're going to reemphasize some of the ancient work from ancient Rome, that would make Italy naturally a spot for that. The Italian city-states, and we can see even on the map there, I should have clarified that you can still see here the different geographic boundaries here, the different city-states. Italy is not completely united yet, so they became the major centers of trade and economic growth. A lot of the Italian trade and shipping routes brought new ideas and wealth as well. 9, what city and family became a dominant force during the Renaissance in Italy? The city of Florence. You can see in the light green there where Florence is located. And the Medici family became the chief patrons during the period of time of the Renaissance. When you think about a patron, kind of think about what a patron is. You're actually a patron, each one of you. Maybe not of the arts, but you're a patron of wherever you might go to shop or what restaurant you might go out to eat. So wealth allowed the patrons to spend money on luxury items. Many expressed their wealth by paying for works of art. This allowed artisans to focus in on their craft. You can see some artwork here. How did art begin to change during the Renaissance? Focus less on religious figures, more accurate, realistic takes, perspective, technique to draw in 3 dimensions and depth. I'm just going to shrink this painting here again. 12, who were some of the influential artists during this time period? So you can think about some of the greatest artists of all time, and many of whom were influential during this period of time. Leonardo da Vinci, he created the Last Supper and Mona Lisa. And of course, in addition to being a painter, he was an inventor, a scientist, a great sculptor. Michelangelo, Sistine Chapel, the Statue of David. Raphael, famous for painting Madonnas. Madonna is a painting of the Virgin Mary, who's, according to religious teachings, the mother of Jesus. Okay, and you can see some of the things that we mentioned here. The Mona Lisa on the left, the statue of David on the right, and a Madonna photo in the center. So when we think about Da Vinci, why is he considered to have been the ideal Renaissance man? In addition to being an artist, he had many, many different interests, which extended to botany, anatomy, optics, music, architecture, and engineering. And the great Renaissance person is somebody who is skilled in many different areas. So for many, Da Vinci is considered to be the poster person, or the person who's most representative of the Renaissance period. And he had so many varied interests. Okay, let's look at number 14. Cite some examples of how Da Vinci was a man before his time, meaning he had foresight to see what might happen down the road. And he created many designs for inventions, things that he didn't necessarily develop and invent physically himself just because the technology was not yet available. But he had the ideas for many of these different things during this period of time. So he's a man before his time. He had designs and sketches for flying machines, parachutes, tanks, machine guns, submarines, some of which we have some images to share here. So you have the flying machine. This would be a helicopter. Okay, 15, how did new writers like Baldassare Castellone describe the virtues of good men and women in his book, The Book of Cordier? So he described men as good at games, but not a gambler, play an instrument, athletic, study literature and history. So it's very similar to Da Vinci, kind of a well-rounded Renaissance person, where for women, they should be graceful, kind, reserved, and beauty comes from their goodness. '16 had a Niccolo Machiavelli in his book The Prince describe how leaders obtain and maintain power. And The Prince is basically the foremost political handbook during this period of time in history. Machiavelli claimed the most successful rulers were those who were the most ruthless and willing to do anything to succeed. Lying, cheating, stealing, or even killing to get what they wanted was something that he advocated. And his very famous quote from the book, as we move into 17, you can see in the imagery there, both his book on the left and his very famous quote, "The end justifies the means." So you can kind of think about that quote and see whether or not you agree with that statement. And you can even share your own response for 17, because I'm not going to mark it wrong if you have something different than what I might share out with you. And keep in mind, this goes for any opinion questions as we go through the recorded lessons throughout the year. If it's an opinion one, you can put whatever opinion you have, not necessarily what I put down. Usually I give you a perspective, and the perspective could be both sides. So you could answer, yes, all politicians are brutal in their tactics, and you must be willing to take dramatic steps, even if they are somewhat, towing the line of corruption or even something illegal in order to get into your position. No, if you're a good person, you should not change the type of person you are just to win an election. I would assume most people agree with the no aspect, but probably understand that yes happens probably too often within society today. So how have modern politics changed since Machiavelli wrote this book? So this, again, is a connection we're trying to make to contemporary society. I kind of alluded to it already. Politicians are still willing to do whatever is necessary to win within reason. I'm not indicating that people kill in order to get elected to office, but they may do things that you would think They might lie for sure or make false promises at the very least. Today, modern technology and social media, political advertisements, and commercials all have made it easier to get a candidate's message out. And The Print is a book that is still widely read today. In fact, if you go to college at some point in time down the road and you have a philosophy class or even a history class, you may be required to read Machiavelli's The Prince. And then for each of the recorded lessons we go through, there'll be a little lesson reflection question. Again, this will be kind of your opinion. So the lesson reflection question here, why was the Renaissance such a consequential historical period of time? So I'll give you a moment to think about that. And I'll share out my responses. And again, you could have a different list here than me. Okay, some things you could have potentially put down. For too long, people were just going through the motions during the Dark Ages without creativity and new ideas. During the Dark Ages, citizens became more acceptors than creators. And then the spark of new creativity would allow for additional advancements in many different areas. In fact, some of the periods of time we'll be looking at in the future kind of can trace their foundation roots back to the Renaissance. For example, eventually we'll be looking at the scientific revolution. And without the idea, the basic premise that individuals need to think for themselves, the scientific revolution would never have occurred. So hopefully you enjoyed our discussion of the Renaissance. And until next time, Mr. Clarke is out.